That road you just saw me turn down put us in the vicinity of the ghost town of Greeley Center. There is nothing here at all except for just wide open, plains. And Greeley Center actually was built around the same time. I was talking about how these settlers came out and they started towns and they were hoping the railroad would come here. And they had, probably in the neighborhood of 100 people, and which is pretty good size for, way out here. And the railroad ended up, missing this area. So the people here mostly moved over to Horace, which is not too far from here, but that got them along the railroad, and was obviously needed. So the wind is kicking up. It is a little bit of a dust storm out here. You can imagine what it would have been like in 1885 when you're coming out here. There's, it's just very dry. The wind is blowing. It had to have been just a crazy time to think about starting a settlement. This is pretty crazy, sitting here imagining this is where people try to start a town. If you remember earlier, I was talking about the ghost town of Whitelaw because there was a guy named Whitelaw Reid who was a friend of Horace Greeley, and I mentioned that Reid would be coming up later, and so here is where it's come up. So right here is where it says today Astor, A-S-T-O-R, which is a ghost town, even though there is, railroad here and there's some agricultural things here and maybe a business of some sort, a lot of farming equipment right here. But this was originally called Reid because of Whitelaw Reid. This is a couple miles, west of Greeley Center, which we were just at. And, the railroad came through here. And in fact, a lot of people thought this might become the county seat of Greeley County. Even the newspaper that was in Tribune moved here. And they thought that maybe that would be the county seat. And they had their election, and Tribune won. Horace was second, and Reid was a distant third and didn't get very many votes at all, actually. And so when that happened, a lot of the businesses moved to Horace and Tribune, and was the demise of Reid. I found that some people might think that the town was named after John Jacob Astor, who was known as one of the richest people in the world in, the late 1800s, about when this town would have maybe switched from Reid to Astor. It's possible he was kind of a rival of Horace Greeley, so maybe because they didn't win the county seat, they thought, well, we'll name it after the person that, is kind of a rival. And an interesting fact about John Jacob Astor, he was on the Titanic, and that's where he passed away. About 1896, I think that's when the post office closed, and the railroad would have been running through here, so there could have been people living here and some things going on for a little while. But now it's interesting because they do have just a whole bunch of farming equipment over here. And then there's some, certainly not old buildings, there's some buildings near the railroad, not using them for the railroad, but obviously using them for something else in the farming community. So yeah, used to be, this could have been the county seat of Greeley County, and if it would have all come together, this would have been where everybody would have been. Instead, there's nothing much left at all. We have made it to the Colorado state line. In fact, we're on State Line Road, and we're here because there was a town here. It was called Colokan, Colorado, Kansas, Colokan, and it was on the Kansas side of the border, and has a very interesting history and somewhat comical at times. It was started right when the railroad came through here, 1887, and so people started a settlement here, and they had a railroad siding where the railroad would stop. And just across the state line is the town of Towner, Colorado. And it's just literally a mile away. You can see it from here, standing on the railroad tracks where Colokan used to be. You can see Towner just down the way. And so there was obviously a rivalry between the two towns, and they were in different states. and so it's kind of unusual. Sometimes there's the rivalry, maybe Tribune and Horace, but this one was between towns from different states. And the railroad decided to stopping here, and they would stop 1 mile. They figured they wouldn't want to stop at both places. It's so close to each other. So that, made the people here angry. There were, little feuds back and forth. The comical part of the story is that one night, and imagine there's not a lot of lights at night in 1880s. So some of the men from Colokan go down secretly and steal the railroad depot from Towner to bring it back here to be, as the railroad depot. They found out when they got back that in the darkness, they took the wrong building, and the railroad depot was still in Towner, and they had the wrong building here. So, kind of a fitting story, because soon after, Colokan became a ghost town in the 1890s, and there's nothing left here except for some really good stories. From where I started today to at the eastern edge of the county to here is about 25 miles if you drive straight. And obviously we took a couple detours, but a pretty short drive. And that is where almost everything is to see in Greeley County. I'm going to see if I can find anything else. We're right here on the Colorado border, like I mentioned, and there was a Colorado sign. They're kind of known for having these really nice welcome to Colorado signs. It's gone. But let's see if we can wander around the county and find anything else. Way off the main road on some really, really back roads is a cemetery like I've never seen before. It's the Rogers Cemetery. And as I got out and looked around, I've just, usually you see cemeteries even small cemeteries have some, kind of more manicured, and this one is totally different. And I'll show you. The reason this is the Rogers Cemetery is because there were two brothers, last name Rogers, and they were both, I believe, in the Army, and they had come out here, early settlers, and they were homesteading this land, and they unfortunately died in a blizzard out here in 1886, and their dog went to the nearest town to try to get help, and they brought help. The dog led people back to here, and they found, the brothers, unfortunately, dead. And so they started this cemetery. This was the Rogers family cemetery. And then years later, their family gave it over to the Army. So it says GAR Cemetery, and that is the Grand Army of the Republic, GAR. And so there are other military people who have died that are buried here, and it's hard to find them. You start walking around, it's not very well maintained. We are way out in the middle of nowhere, and just kind of stumbled upon this cemetery. So heck of a find. And obviously, you think about the winters in this part of Kansas, and you probably don't realize it when you're here, but you are a little bit higher elevation, 3,000 to 4,000 feet, because we're almost in Colorado. And so this part of Kansas is higher elevation. The winters are colder. And if, as you look around, you could imagine, I see, it looks like a storm coming in right now, but you can imagine in the middle of winter, it would have been some wild and unbelievably difficult times to survive. gone everywhere you can go along 96 east and west that I think I could find anything, at least. And the other road that's kind of the main road is 27. It goes north and south from Hamilton County on the south to Wallace County on the north. And so I'm driving that road now. Because the railroad was on 96, there's really nothing on 27 except just very wide open, very beautiful fields. It kind of reminds me of Loving County, Texas. That was the first video I did about the smallest county in a state. Is actually the smallest county in the United States in terms of population, but there's no historical buildings or towns. If there were towns around here, I'm not aware of where they were. So, but it's a really nice drive. I had mentioned before how in the battle between Tribune and Horace, the Tribune had a better water source, and that brings us to White Woman Creek, and it's just on the north side of Tribune. So when there was a creek, today it's dry, but when there was a creek, obviously that was at least something in this very dry part of Kansas that the people of Tribune could get a little bit easier access to water. And it went along the railroad. That was the closest place that the creek went to. And you might wonder, how does a creek get a name like White Woman Creek? Well, the story was in 1868, 2 white women were captured by Native Americans. And then when a couple of rescuers went to get the women, one of the women wanted to stay with the Native Americans. And she actually went to battle against soldiers from Fort Wallace, which Wallace County is just here to the north, and she was killed. And they say that in the somewhere along the creek you can still hear her screams or yells, as the urban legend goes. And it's very windy today, and I went down there to listen and I didn't hear anything. So I'm not sure if the urban legend is true, but it's a good story and an unusual name for the creek here in Greeley County. We are getting close to the end of the day, and the wind is dying down a little bit, so I thought I'd hop out of the vehicle and talk on this one. But this was where the ghost town of Hector used to be, and we're at the intersection of, it looks like, Road L and Road 14. So they're definitely, when you're out here in the middle of nowhere, there's not too many creative things to name it after. But Hector was a pretty successful town around 1885. And it was, like all these other towns, hoping maybe be the county seat. You think, well, what was Hector? How was that related to Horace Greeley? Because all these things were related to him. Well, Hector was his dog's name, and so they decided to name the town after Horace Greeley's dog. And so 1885, they kind of got things going. Town was building, and then I mentioned before when I was at the Rogers Cemetery how they had the blizzard in 1886. Well, there was a person who was supposed to come here and become the postman for the town of Hector, and he died in that blizzard, and so no one was actually able to take the post of Hector. And soon thereafter, the town died. They decided to move down towards Tribune. We're 4 miles north of basically Tribune and Horace, and it ended up becoming the first ghost town of Greeley County. So thought that'd be an appropriate way to end our traveling and finding of ghost towns in Greeley County. There were more ghost towns, and I'll list them. I kind of list them here on the screen, and I don't know where they're at. I haven't seen any maps, but post office information has been available that there's these towns that were around for sometimes a few years and sometimes a few months. So very interesting, because literally here in Hector there is nothing left of the town, obviously, and at one time it had the hopes and dreams of a lot of people right here. So I've gone and found as many places as I could find in Greeley County. I'm sure there are ones I've missed. I'm sure there's some places, maybe some historical places, maybe just some cemeteries, things like that that I've probably missed. But it was pretty interesting. What'd you guys think? I thought that, you know, kind of strange with Tribune and Horace so close together, the only two towns left. And other than that, it's just a lot of like this, a lot of very wide open spaces. Apparently behind me, this is the Greeley wildlife area. I don't see any wildlife, but I'm sure there's plenty that come through here. But it's very, very beautiful out here. I know that a lot of people probably think this is the middle of nowhere, but for 1,284 people, this is where they call home. So I really have enjoyed exploring Greeley County, and certainly there's plenty to do if you're heading towards Colorado and want to go through Tribune and any of the other places I've shown on the video.